The Trump administration is revoking the temporary legal status of another 530,000 non-citizens that the Biden administration had flown into the country. Yes, you heard that right. Even though there's already tens of millions of people infesting this country right now illegally, the previous administration was still hell-bent on bringing more in, as many as they possibly could. And Trump announcing the termination of this program and giving them all the boot isn't even the first time. Trump already has canceled the temporary status of another 600,000 Venezuelans and 520,000 other Haitians who the previous administration had propped up with programs like these. All of these designed to keep millions of non-citizens in the country. These three programs, including this most recent one that Trump is canceling, equals 1.6 million people that the federal government had allowed to come into the U.S. to stay. 1.6 million people. This is not counting the 20 to 30 million people who are illegally here now, hiding within the country. And this also doesn't count the Ukrainians and more. All of this is beyond outrageous. But now, thanks to Trump's actions here, this gravy train is coming to an end. This is an article from the UK Daily Mail discussing this latest development. They write, Trump revokes legal status of more than 500,000 migrants, but faces fury over uncertainty for Ukrainian refugees. Oh no. Donald Trump, this is by Stephen Lepore, whatever. Donald Trump's administration will revoke the temporary legal status of 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans in the United States. The announcement was made by Department of Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem on a notice to a federal registrar on Friday. This is the latest expansion of his crackdown on immigration. The order applies to about 532,000 people from the four countries who came to the United States since October of 2022 under a program called the CHNV that the Biden administration was heavily criticized for. And why shouldn't they have been? I mean, we're importing hundreds of thousands of people, and we already have a mass illegal immigration problem. But, whatever, right, Joe Biden? Now, uncertainty still remains for some 240,000 Ukrainians who sought refuge in the U.S. following the Russian invasion back in 2021. Trump was said to be considering ending their legal status even before recent tensions between Washington and Kyiv. The migrants losing legal status arrived with financial sponsors and were given 2-year permits to live and work in the U.S. Noem said that they will lose their legal status on April 24th, or 30 days after the publication of the notice in the Federal Register. The new policy impacts people who are already in the U.S. and who came under the humanitarian parole program. Oh boy, does that sound flowery and wonderful. It follows an earlier Trump administration decision to end what it called the broad abuse of the humanitarian parole, which, a long-standing legal tool presidents have used to allow people from countries where there's war or political instability to enter and temporarily live in the U.S. The problem is temporary was turning into permanent, which was the real purpose here. Now, during his campaign, President Donald Trump promised to deport millions of people who are in the U.S. illegally. And as president, he has also been ending legal pathways for immigrants to come to the U.S. and to stay. The Department of Homeland Security said parolees without a lawful basis to stay in the U.S., quote, must depart, end quote, before the parole termination date. Parole is inherently temporary, and parole alone is not an underlying basis for obtaining any immigration status. Don't tell that to the former Biden administration. Now, before the new order, the beneficiaries of the program could stay in the U.S. until the parole expires, although the administration had stopped processing their applications for asylum, visas, and other requests that might allow them to remain longer. The administration's decision has already been challenged in courts, because of course it has. A group of American citizens and immigrants sued the Trump administration for ending this humanitarian parole and are seeking to reinstate the programs of the four nationalities. Lawyers and activists raised their voices to denounce the government's decision. Now, my friends, of course there are challenges here. The corrupt courts have been handing out temporary restraining orders against the Trump administration like it was candy at a Halloween party. Of course they're going to try and challenge us. The reality is, this insane fight to keep these non-citizens here no matter what, and I'm including the corrupt judges stepping in as well, like Boasberg, the rogue judge that illegally is trying to tell the Trump administration how he can use the Alien Enemies Act, which he does not have any authority to do so. The only actual legal judicial review he can do is to look into whether the Alien Enemies Act was invoked validly. That's it. He can't tell the Trump administration how to use it. But that's another conversation for another day. But the reason why I bring this up and why this fight is such a big deal is that if Donald Trump were to try and follow through on mass deportation, similar to what President Dwight D. Eisenhower did back in 1954, removing several million illegals in a matter of months, to do the same, Trump will need the Alien Enemies Act as the tool that he can use for broad action to mass deport millions of illegal aliens living within the U.S. Right now, the current immigration system has been designed to slow walk any attempts at removing non-citizens from our country. That is the purpose of the immigration system right now. It is designed to keep them all here for as long as possible so that eventually American citizens will just throw up their hands in despair, setting the stage to give them all amnesty, which would forever alter this country into something it was never designed to be. That is the real purpose of mass migration. Let me take you down memory lane for a moment here. Ronald Reagan, President Reagan, made an amnesty deal with the Democrats back in 1986. At the time, there were roughly 2.7 to 3 million illegal aliens in the country. He made a deal with the then Democrat leader, Tip O'Neill. The deal was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act, or IRCA, and it was a defining moment in modern American history. President Ronald Reagan traded amnesty for 2.7 million illegal aliens, mostly Mexican, for promises of border security, including building the wall. Now, at least half of these illegals that were given amnesty back in 1986 resided in California, a place which, at the time, was a huge Republican stronghold. Republicans, for example, for nearly 30 years, in every presidential election, had voted Republican. But that all came crashing down after mass amnesty of 1986. The state's demographics dramatically shifted. A new voter base was born, and by the year 2000, the Republicans were essentially no more. And today, the state has become one of the strongest Democrat bastions in the country, all thanks to amnesty. And as for the border wall, well, it was never completed. It was slow-walked until the early 1990s, and then magically canceled by the Democrats, who were complaining that it was just too expensive and that there were bigger, better, more important priorities to look into. Reagan himself later regretted his amnesty bill, and in his autobiography, published back in 1990, called An American Life, he wrote that our borders remain too open, and the flow of illegal immigrants continues unabated. The new law was supposed to solve that, but it hasn't. And he lamented the enforcement's failure, noting that the bill's two legs, amnesty and border control, were unevenly executed. And he hoped, as he said, that future generations wouldn't face the same problem on this scale. If only he could have seen what would come later. Now, once the Democrat Party realized that they could import fresh new armies of voters by the millions, the stage was set to encourage illegals to come pouring into the country, and now we have somewhere between 20 and 30 million people infesting the U.S. today. The Democrat Party and their allies in the media and their political activists pretending to be judges know that this is the true endgame. And they are very, very close. They can almost taste it. They just need to grant amnesty, and it's all over. The will of the American people won't matter anymore. They will be able to establish one-party rule, and the rest will be history. That is the real reason behind this charade of illegal immigration. You see, people that come here illegally typically do so because they don't have the money to find a way to do so legally. People that need government assistance tend to overwhelmingly vote for the party that gives them the most stuff, and that happens to be the Democrat Party. This is why you have activists like Boasberg ruling the way that they do. It's all about thwarting Trump at every turn on his attempts to remove illegals from the country. They are stalling for time. They are trying to outlast Trump, either through the midterms or hoping that the next administration will either be back in their hands, which right at the moment seems highly unlikely, or at the very least, maybe they'll get another W. Bush type who was favorable to the idea of amnesty. Now, the UK Daily Mail goes on to say that Friday's action is going to cause needless chaos and heartbreak for families and communities across the country, said Karen Tumlin, a founder and director of Justice Action Center. Boy, what a name. One of the organizations that filed the lawsuit at the end of February. She called it reckless, cruel, and counterproductive. Oh, I bet she did. The Biden administration allowed up to 30,000 people a month from the four countries to come to the United States for 2 years with eligibility to work. It persuaded Mexico to take back the same number from those countries because the U.S. could deport few, if any, to their homes. Haitians and Cubans that are involved with the program are immediately eligible for taxpayer-funded federal benefits like Medicaid. Of course they are, food stamps, and welfare. Analysis by UK Daily Mail indicates that the Medicaid cost, which costs around $9,100 per enrollee, would cost $1.8 billion if every Haitian who entered the country received it. SNAP benefits, more commonly known as food stamps, would cost the country $451 million, with general welfare benefits climbing to $1.2 billion. The three figures takes the overall spend on benefits to over an eye-watering $3.4 billion. That's annually. Even if only a quarter of the Haitians are getting all the benefits they are entitled to receive, that figure would stand at $850 million. And remember, this is just one small segment. There's the other million plus from the other two programs that Trump is ending as well. And I'm sure that there's more that we don't know about yet. Now, average costs were obtained from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the Department of Health and Human Services, and a Medicaid commission. Court documents show that the vetting process isn't stringent, surprise, surprise, with an approval rating of 98.3% for Haitian applicants from January to June of last year. Well, that is a big surprise, isn't it? Now, since 2022, Daily Mail writes, more than 500,000 people have come to the U.S. under the policy also known as CHNV. It was part of the Biden administration's approach to encourage people to come through new legal channels while cracking down on those who cross the border illegally. Cracking down on those 5 million illegal aliens crossed into the U.S. in just the last 2 years of the Biden administration. What cracking down were they doing here? The only crack I see is the ones that these guys are smoking. Oh, my God. Okay, so basically what the Biden administration was trying to do was cut out the middleman. Why go through the illegal immigration process when you can just transport them here legally? You can't see the sarcastic quotes I'm doing, but they're there. Trust me. So, and by giving them temporary legal status, they would just keep them in a holding pattern in the U.S. until eventually citizenship would come up. That was going to be the end game for all of these people. It's all deeply insidious. And the Democrats aren't even trying to hide their plans here. You got good old Chuck U. Schumer, who tried to get amnesty as recently as 2021, citing the humanity of the situation and, of course, the poor children. But it's all done with a wink and a nod to his party. The real purpose is all about absolute power. Make no mistake about this. Do not be fooled by the Democrat Party here. The only reason that these people care about these illegal aliens is that they are looking at them as untold millions of people who are just ready to vote for them. Just give them enough food stamps, enough welfare benefits, and you got them hooked on voting for your party. It's despicable, and it's all about that absolute beautiful raw power that the Democrat Party desperately wants. If it ever happens, if they ever get amnesty, that's it. It's one-party rule for the rest of our lives. And that, my friends, is what all of this is really all about.